Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the new patrons and other donors who have helped support this channel in recent days and since I started, actually, as well as all the offers of help with graphics and other support I've received lately. It means a lot, and it's extremely helpful. I do have a long-term goal for this, and that is to help create a sort of traditional Catholic version of Huffington Post or something similar, a multimedia platform that produces original content but also aggregates stories from around the web into one place. I'm obviously a long way off from that at this stage of things. The call for viewer article submissions is still open, so if you want, get articles or poetry or artwork or whatever it is in. We've had some great submissions so far, and if you want to join the people who have supported this channel, there are options in the description below. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all who have supported before we get into the news today. And what news it is. Late on Friday, the Catholic media was lit up by another document by Archbishop Vigano that appeared first in the National Catholic Register, which was then copied in LifeSite, The Remnant, and the other usual places. Archbishop Vigano had been invited by EWTN at the National Catholic Register, same organization, to participate in a symposium called Abuse and the Way to Healing. Given that the Archbishop has been in hiding since August, he obviously could not attend a symposium himself. He did, however, submit a document to the Register, which went viral. Apparently they sat on it for several days because it was actually dated the 10th of February. I'm actually going to read the copy from theremnant.com. The following is the latest statement from Archbishop Vigano. The article The Remnant posted, because they give an intro like, most of us do, is called Archbishop Vigano Strikes Again, Targets 1960s as Start of Abuse Crisis. But I am just going to skip down to the actual words of Archbishop Vigano. Despite grave problems, the Lord will never abandon his church. I thank you for inviting me to take part in this symposium on abuse and the way to healing in anticipation of the upcoming Bishop Summit at the Vatican. My contribution will draw on my personal experience of 51 years of priesthood. It is evident to all that a primary cause of the present terrible crisis of sexual abuse committed by ordained clergy, including bishops, is the lack of proper spiritual formation of candidates to the priesthood. That lack, in turn, is largely explained by the doctrinal and moral corruption of many seminary forementers, corruption that increased exponentially beginning in the 1960s. I entered a pontifical seminary in Rome and began my studies at the Gregorian University when I was 25 years old. It was 1965, just months before the end of Vatican II. I couldn't help but notice, not only in my own college, but also in many others in Rome, that some seminarians were very immature and that these houses of formation were marked by a general and very serious lack of discipline. A few examples will suffice. Seminarians sometimes spent the night outside my seminary, as the supervision was woefully inadequate. Our spiritual director was in favor of priestly ordination ad tempus, the idea that ordained priesthood could be merely a temporary status. At Gregorian, one of the professors of moral theology favored situation ethics, and some classmates confided to me that their spiritual directors had no objection to their presenting themselves for priestly ordination despite their unresolved and continual grave sins against chastity. Certainly, those who suffer from deep-seated same-sex attraction should never be admitted to seminary. Moreover, before any seminarian is accepted for ordination, he must not only strive for chastity, but actually achieve it. He must already be living chaste celibacy peacefully and for a prolonged period of time, for if this is lacking, the seminarian and his forementors cannot have the requisite confidence that he is called to the celibate life. Bishops have the paramount responsibility for the formation of their candidates to the priesthood. Any bishop who has covered up abuse or seduction of minors, vulnerable adults, or adults under a priest's pastoral care, including seminarians, is not fit for that responsibility or for any episcopal ministry and should be removed from his office. I am praying intensely for the success of the February summit. Although I would rejoice greatly if the summit were successful, the following questions reveal that there is no sign of a genuine willingness to attend to the real causes of the present situation. Why will the meeting focus exclusively on the abuse of minors? The These crimes are indeed the most horrific, but the crises in the United States and Chile have largely precipitated the upcoming summit have to do with the abuse committed against young adults, including seminarians, not only against minors. Almost nothing has been said about sexual misconduct with adults, which is itself a grave abuse of pastoral authority, whether or not the relationship was consensual. Why does the word homosexuality never appear in recent official documents of the Holy See? This is by no means to suggest that most of those with a homosexual inclination are abusers, but the fact remains that the overwhelming majority of abuse has been inflicted on post-pubescent boys by homosexual clerics. It is mere hypocrisy to condemn the abuse and claim to sympathize with the victims without facing up to this fact honestly. A spiritual revitalization of the clergy is necessary, but it will be ultimately ineffectual if it does not address this problem. Why does Pope Francis keep and even call as his close collaborators people who are notorious homosexuals? Why has he refused to answer legitimate and sincere questions about these appointments? In doing so, he has lost credibility on his real will to reform the Curia and fight the corruption. In my third testimony, I begged the Holy Father to face up to the commitments he himself made in assuming his office as successor of Peter. I pointed out that he took upon himself the mission of confirming his brothers in guiding all souls in following Christ along the way of the cross. I urged him then, and I now urge him again, to tell the truth, repent, show his willingness to follow the mandate given to Peter, and, once converted, to confirm his brothers. Luke 22:32. I pray that the bishops gathered in Rome will remember the Holy Spirit, whom they receive with the imposition of hands, and carry out their responsibility to represent their particular churches by firmly asking for, and insisting on, an answer to the above questions during the summit. Indeed, I pray that they will not return to their countries without proper answers to these questions, for to fail in this regard would mean abandoning their own flocks to the wolves and allowing the entire church to suffer dreadful consequences. Despite the problems I have described, I continue to have hope, because the Lord will never abandon his church. Signed, Archbishop Carlo Vigano, the former Apostolic Nuncio to the United States of America. Clearly, Vigano is saying much the same thing the rest of us have been saying for some time now. If the bishops meet this week in Rome to address the abuse of minors, then they're going to miss the point. The point is the nature of the abuse, which isn't being discussed at all. The high number of priests who are members of the Rainbow Coalition is staggering, and yet the Vatican refuses to acknowledge the problem. With Cardinal Cupich leading the way in this investigation, we can only doubt if anything is going to be addressed at all. After all, Cupich is the cardinal who has punished priests for being too traditional, and even attempted to send priests to intensive therapy for having attitudes towards that particular sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance. That is more befitting a priest of the Catholic Church than we typically see these days. The Archbishop makes the same point that Bishop Athanasius Schneider recently made. A week or so ago, Schneider said that if the bishops in Rome meet and don't address the abuse crisis, it will be a big waste of everyone's time. Here's a quote from LifeSite from Bishop Schneider. Quote, "If the upcoming summit on clerical sexual abuse in the Vatican will not address the issue of the moral relativism and non-belief in the perennial validity of the sixth commandment of the Decalogue as the deepest cause of clerical sexual abuse, and if it will not highlight the predominant role of homosexual behavior in the clerical sex abuse cases, the summit will give a highly irresponsible answer and will be doomed to failure from the start, manifesting thereby also a peculiar form of clericalism." End quote. A link to that piece and the other sources can be found on returntotradition.org, which is linked in the description below. Schneider and Vigano are both correct. If this does not address the nature of this abuse, then the summit is doomed to failure. It's refreshing to hear bishops of the church say such things publicly and with such clarity. There is precious little of that happening today from those who are supposed to be our shepherds. Yet there is still one thing missing. The root of the abuse crisis isn't the sexual orientation of the predators, though that is a key important factor. The root of the issue is modernism, which is a philosophical and theological revolt against the timeless teachings of the Church. Virtually all issues in the Church today go back to the infiltration of the Church by modernists beginning in the mid-19th century, as well as by Masons and Communists later. There is enough historical evidence of that now that there should be no doubt about the nature of the crisis, yet many continue to deny the real nature of the problem. A clue to that is in Vigano's statement. He entered seminary in 1965. As a priest, the only paradigm he has ever known in the Church is the age of modernism. I've heard Bishop Schneider speak on various issues enough to know that he is definitely aware of the problem, but so few princes of the Church are willing to speak about and against the crisis of modernism that it speaks volumes of the awareness, or lack thereof, of the real nature of the crisis in the Church. I would be remiss if I didn't provide the Vatican's take on the Abuse Summit. The Vatican's propaganda minister, Andrea Tornielli, said the following to Crux magazine on February 14th. And remember, Crux claims to be taking the Catholic pulse. Quote, "They have the duty to be aware of the drama of the victims because this is important. You can have the best practices, the best norms, but if you don't change your mentality, if you don't demonstrate real compassion for the suffering of victims, you're not able to solve the problem. This is not a technical meeting for deciding which rules are best or a meeting of experts," he keeps saying. It's a meeting of shepherds, pastors, bishops, priests, who are engaged in announcing the message of the gospel. They'll try to make the Church more transparent, but not only in managing sexual abuse, but to be transparent in the light of the gospel, so that the light of God can be reflected by the Church. Tornielli goes on to say that the majority of abuse cases occur inside the family, not the Church. While statistically true, that statement rings pretty hollow. As I've said previously, it isn't good to compare the Catholic Church to other organizations, because one of the marks of the Church is holiness. To be holy means to be set apart, to be different in the light of the grace of God. The Catholic Church is a categorically different organization than anything else on the planet. The Church is not merely another organization, and to attempt to compare it to other organizations is pure modernism. This is especially true when we have at least 7 decades of reported abuse cases that tie in perfectly to Bella Dodd's claims that she helped recruit men in the 1930s on behalf of Joseph Stalin to infiltrate the Church, who were morally unfit for the priesthood. And she explicitly said it was men of the kind we are talking about now that were her prime recruits. She testified to all of this before Congress in the 1950s after she had converted to the faith. If you're not familiar with the communist infiltration of the Church or Bella Dodd, I have a video on that topic that I'll put in the comments below. Finally, I leave off with this. The Church is in dire straits. She is in deep need of your prayers and personal sacrifices. With Lent approaching, the time is ripe for a focused season of personal sacrifice for the Church. Consider what mortifications you can take on to help liberate the Church. As always, thank you for listening and for your continued support. Like I said at the start, it does mean a lot to me and my family. God bless you, and Ave Maria.